Hey guys, how's it going? I'm Duke of Italy, your favorite lo-fi music YouTuber, and welcome to the first of many classic album reviews to come. And today, we are covering the classic heavy metal originator, Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow. Now, she probably knows this by the title, but I made this to say happy birthday to my good friend Evie. Evie, if you're there, hi, happy birthday. But also, it's another friend's birthday, Joyce, if you're watching this, happy birthday. And if anyone else's birthday is on December 15th when this is going up, happy birthday. Or if you're watching this on your birthday anyway, happy birthday. It's everyone's birthday. But Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow. Ritchie Blackmore, the guitar virtuoso, originally from Deep Purple, made this band called Rainbow. And Rainbow consists of Ritchie Blackmore and also, infamously, Ronnie James Dio, at least for their classic run of albums. Now, before I talk about anything of the actual content of this album, you gotta remember Dio is an absolute legend in the metal community, or just almost music as a whole. I mean, being in bands such as Black Sabbath, Dio, and Rainbow already gets you such a huge spot in the history of metal. But also he's got lesser known bands such as Elf that were kind of funny to think about, especially coming into this review. So this is almost a super group already, with Dio from Elf and Ritchie Blackmore from Deep Purple, as well as a few other people, but they're all a little less important. Now, I'm going to say before any of the actual music content that I also much prefer Rising to this album. Rainbow's Rising, I think, is utterly amazing, if not just for stargazing alone, because that song is probably one of the best heavy metal tracks of all time. It's really epic and long, and it's got an amazing build to it. I could see why some people wouldn't like it if they're a little inexperienced in terms of music, because it's just pretty long, but a lot of the benefits in Rising you can see on Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow as well. There is a bit of a divide between the two, where Rising has a little bit more clean production. Rising just seems to come into its own a little bit more, and it really seems to deviate from rock a whole lot. It really feels like its own thing. It feels crazy innovative, kind of like how Black Sabbath's debut is, and several other early heavy metal records. But Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow is a bit more crossover style heavy metal, as in nothing either of the two musicians here, except for Ritchie Blackmore and Deep Purple's in rock, never really quite touched heavy metal yet. This was very early 70s, like not a lot of heavy metal stuff is happening, other than, I guess, Iron Butterfly touched it a little bit. Beatles barely touched it on a couple of their songs. But here you get this new wave of music, and it's like, what could possibly be some of the early stuff? And you got a lot of interesting influences here. Of course, you have Ritchie Blackmore's guitar work being very much of like a virtuoso. He's very good at playing the guitar. He goes all over. It's not as groovy, and it's a lot more like flashy. Of course, it's not as moody and groovy as someone like Tony Iommi, but it is a lot more technically proficient. And some might critique a bit of technicality in their metal, and it has such beautiful melodies coming off of it. It's not like a simple bluesy groove. It's more like this grand melody that comes after it. And in terms of this album, there's a lot of influence from Dio on this album with the medieval aesthetic of the whole thing, where you got stories about fantasy and castles and knights and all this great themes that I personally love. And that's one aspect of metal that I feel like was very influential that people don't talk about that much, is Dio's incorporation of these sort of medieval elements. Black Sabbath didn't really do that. Led Zeppelin did do that with songs like Misty Mountain Hop. But who knows, maybe Burzum would never exist without Dio singing about castles. You also have a pianist on this album, or a keyboardist. I think he uses keys at a couple points. He certainly uses Mellotron, which is just a great addition as well. I love Mellotron, at least the string sound effect, anytime it's used. I think it's so pretty. It's a really moody inclusion, and it's here on a few times on this album. Now, Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow is a shorter album. It's only about 36 minutes long. It's pretty tight, and some songs are much shorter, some are much longer, and I think it's a lot of diversity in the track list as well, such as it wasn't really necessarily pinned down to specific subgenres yet. You could really do all this stuff, and people would just think it's more on top of the music. Yeah, plenty of classics on here, plenty of really interesting songs here. In my opinion, a lot of this actually has almost like dips its toes into prog a little bit. There aren't any polyrhythms or really extended solos, but there are a couple tracks here that brush on some longer track lengths exceeding 5 minutes, which prog tends to do almost every time. But here it just goes beyond that a little bit. It's almost like an entry into prog. And I'm just going to say, before I talk about the music one last time, I've said that a few times here, if you like this album and you want it on steroids and you want it tripping on a number of substances and you want it feeling like it's about to kill you, King Crimson's Lizard. I have to include it. That album continues the extended solos, but it like quintuples the length. It loves the medieval aesthetic. The storytelling is all there. The singing is not as good as Ronnie James Dio's voice. It is a lot more medieval sounding though. So you can kind of forgive it just because it adheres to the aesthetic a lot more. But we're not here to talk about Lizard. If you like this album, after I talk about it, I do recommend that you listen to Lizard, because it does have the similar aesthetic. It's a lot less heavy metal, a lot more horn-based. But here we're talking about the amazing Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow. Anyway, it starts off with Man on the Silver Mountain. You got a really nice connection between Ritchie Blackmore's really intense grooves and the bass, the way it's so percussive enough to just push it that much ahead. Which you'll see all over this album is that the bass playing, it's just a little bit percussive, and it pushes just the momentum just that much further so that you never really get bored. And of course, it starts out very groovy. Ritchie Blackmore knows exactly how to do that. And the guitar solo on this track is just nuts. In terms of a song you might describe sort of as classic rock, it really doesn't get much better than this. And Dio's vocals ranges all the way from sort of a more subdued sound, which on later tracks you definitely see because it's more of like almost like a classically tinged type of singing, to this like belting growl almost, which I mean you see similar to like Ozzy Osbourne at the time, but Dio's range is just phenomenal. He hits these crazy high notes, and he just has this really epic feel to him as a vocalist, sort of leaning more towards like power metal stuff, probably what would become power metal, rather than to Ozzy Osbourne leaning more towards doom metal and sort of like, I guess, stoner doom as well. The chorus is pretty long here, and you notice a switch between the riff both times, which is just that nice of a touch because both riffs are really, really legendary sounding. They sound like, honestly, every guitarist should know them because they're just that good, but both of them are so amazing, and they sound really hard to play. I mean, I'm not a guitar player, but like they sound like actually impressive. And then we reach the track Self-Portrait. This one is in 6/8, I believe, with some really heavy guitar lines, which really brings about the heavy metal aesthetic. And if any track has the guitar being the exact main character, it would be Self-Portrait. As much as this is Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow, this song is definitely Ritchie Blackmore's. And this song is a lot shorter, it's a lot more subdued, but the emotion is really brought about here. It's a really nice idea of a self-reflection. It's got a lot of interesting themes of grief and despair, and I guess guilt in a way. So it's a very interesting track. Up next is Black Sheep of the Family. This sort of points out themes about Ritchie Blackmore's stance in Deep Purple, or I guess Dio's stance in a lot of other bands as well, where they're both seen as sort of not as much fitting in with this crowd, especially Ritchie Blackmore, because he pretty much decided that Deep Purple wasn't for him when he was doing Rainbow. It's a very bluesy track, and while it would just be fine with the blues parts itself, Ritchie Blackmore's solos is again what pushes it to a whole different level. And of course, when the key sort of changes for the last solo, his soloing continues into it, which is also pretty amazing. Then we reach one of my favorite tracks on the album, Catch the Rainbow. No, it's not a cheesy power metal track about, I guess, some sort of ascension. It's more of a romantic ballad between a peasant and sort of like a princess. A bit of a tired concept in today's age. You might claim this is a little dated, but if you just put on your like fantasy goggles for a second, think about some Lord of the Rings, then this song will very much appeal to you, because not only of the intense virtuoso guitar playing, because it is nuts on this track. It goes between all sorts of different realms of emotion. The emotions really carry through perfectly. Is it the most relatable song? I mean, I'm sure a lot of people have encountered similar themes of separation, desperation, and it's romance. You don't see romance in metal that often. When you do, it's kind of seen as different. Nothing Else Matters by Metallica, for example. But this song really has the intensity that a lot of those songs lack. Like Keck the Rock could never. And this song starts off almost like psych rock. Really interesting warbly sound there. Almost like a wah pedal is being used, but I really couldn't tell. And Dio's vocals are as sweet as they've ever been. I don't think any of his Dio songs were ever this sweet. And I don't really think of Black Sabbath as being that sweet either. This is just some of the most gorgeous vocals I've ever heard, probably from this whole year. And this is one of the tracks with the mellotron. I don't know what the mellotron does, but it just makes you feel like you're in the Middle Ages, and the mellotron just croons out, and the guitar over the top is just sublime. Funnily enough, it's like the opposite effect of a lot of King Crimson stuff, where you get the mellotron and Fripp just destroying it. both the mellotron and the guitar, I guess. And on this track, they have a guest vocalist who layers the vocals with Dio, and the harmonies are genuinely stunning. It makes this really almost feel symphonic or orchestral with just these beautiful melodies and harmonies together as just this totally complete, gorgeous sound. Gosh, really showing my music theory chops here. And the bass is really, really soft here. It's not as percussive as it was before, but it just pushes it just a little bit yet again. And you can tell it's really not just used for bottom end, but it actually pushes the song forward as it keeps going through the story. Really beautiful track. One of my favorites here, and in the discography of Rainbow as a whole, and in the whole output of Ronnie James Dio or Ritchie Blackmore. Then you got the song Snake Charmer. This song is a little more mid-paced to fast-paced track, especially compared to Catch the Rainbow, and the bass playing is just really percussive on this one. And it's got this galloping feel. It's almost like a proto-Steve Harris from Iron Maiden. So if you like Iron Maiden, definitely listen to this track because it's just going at it. And the main guitar riff and the bass seem to fight against each other until Blackmore breaks out into this crazy solo. And it just screeches out. And it also... Dio, in this context, his vocals are also screeching out, some of his most aggressive, and it seems to just sort of flow out over the top of the solo, especially towards the end of the song. And you get layered guitars, so it's like you have several different layers with Dio on top of it all, just crooning out. Crooning is actually the complete wrong word. He's just screeching out. It's some of his most brutal vocals to date, and probably from any vocalist to date. The next song is The Temple of the King, a really interesting and mysterious song. I actually considered putting this one on my Dungeons & Dragons playlist just because it was so ominous. This one has really interesting layers of mellotron and really nice folk style vocal harmonies. And for one of the few times on this album, you get acoustic guitar, and it sounds utterly gorgeous. Something about the old-fashioned 1970s production style that keeps it from sounding too squeaky or like a bit too rumbly. All you get is the straight emotion that comes off of the guitar, that it fits the ominous emotion of the whole track absolutely perfectly. And the medieval vibes sink through here more than any other track here. It's another example of one of the sort of prog-tinged tracks on this album, kind of like Catch the Rainbow, with a really interesting story, a really interesting medieval feel. And honestly, I could see those two tracks on like a different album, entirely themed medievally. And I'll probably say this right now before I say it towards the end. This album does feel a little bit inconsistent in terms of like theme and style because it kind of breaks out in all these different directions. Of course, this is a landmark album. It pushes the genre into an entire new light, and it is not a concept album, so it doesn't have to adhere to very, very specific aesthetics. But I just prefer my albums being a little tighter in terms of theme. You could have this medieval stuff coat the whole thing, and that's probably another reason why I believe Rising is a better album. But Rising doesn't have the song If You Don't Like Rock and Roll. If You Don't Like Rock and Roll is a classic, probably early 1960s style rock song with the piano lines just banging out chords and the guitars being thick and a little bit dirty, but it's just super fun. And this is only barely pushed into heavy metal territory with the rumbly guitar and the really thick bass sound. Now, this song is mostly just fun, but with Dio's vocals and the piano work, it's pushed into some pretty great territory. And there's a point during the piano solo where there's some claps, which I don't love myself. I complain about claps all the time on this channel, but it's just a fun song. I can't really complain about it being fun. And then we get the song 16th Century Greensleeves, which is a song about a knight torturing a peasant village until they round him up and burn him to death. Morbidity aside, this song's pretty great. This might be the most heavy metal song here, and I do mean heavy. This thing is probably what inches it more towards like doom, or I don't know about power metal, but certainly doom metal, maybe even sort of towards more the Black Sabbath side, especially with Black Sabbath's debut. And this might be Dio's strongest vocal performance, at least one of the strongest of his I've ever heard. And it's amazing, especially right before Ritchie Blackmore's solo, which is one of the best on the album. And especially when the bass starts arpeggiating at the end and it sort of solos it on its own route underneath the guitar. It just sort of like it follows like a very typical like rise, and it reaches the top towards the end of the track. It's a very exciting progression overall, really well paced, and it sounds amazing. And the next is the song Still I'm Sad, and this is a cover of a Yardbirds instrumental that Ritchie Blackmore knew very well. So Ritchie Blackmore wasn't in the Yardbirds, but a lot of people seem to be interested in his thoughts about Eric Clapton and Jimmy Page. Of course, both those people will go on to be amazing guitarists in their own right, one a bit more controversial than the other, even though Jimmy Page is currently dating a 20-something-year-old. I don't know about that, Jimmy. I think she's in it for something a little other than your guitar work. But stealing money aside, a lot of great guitarists at this time, and you can see Ritchie Blackmore is certainly one of the more underrated ones of them. Of course, everyone knows Layla by Eric Clapton or Sunshine of Your Love. And of course, everyone knows pretty much everything Jimmy Page has done because Led Zeppelin has several amazing records. And Ritchie Blackmore, probably still hinting towards the fact of black sheep of the family here, he's kind of left out. And today he is still kind of left out. He's kind of really only considered more by like the metal community, which is a shame because he's just a good guitar player. And still I'm sad, it's probably one of the most tense moments on the album. It's not as sort of ominous as it is really tight sounding, and everything really grips together. And all the work of every instrumental here is super, super heavy. And it's a pretty decent closer. So what do I think about this album as a whole? Listen to the whole thing. I really enjoy it. I'm feeling a Come to Brazil. It's great. I don't think it is the most legendary album from the time, but its status in heavy metal is unmistakable. Some of these songs here are some of my favorite heavy metal tracks I've probably ever heard, and its transition from rock to heavy metal is very palpable here. You could definitely feel it, tinges of prog and heavy metal and stuff sort of inching towards power metal, especially with Dio's amazingly huge voice. And you could probably categorize a little bit of his stuff as power metal, but like not really. But his influence is unmistakable. So if you want to see a good starting point of Dio's stuff, Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow is probably great, especially for his heavy metal stuff, because Elf was a lot more hard rock. But this whole thing, just aesthetically, is so interesting and cool. I really like this album. I hope you guys like it too. Once again, happy birthday, Evie, and happy birthday, Joyce, and happy birthday to everybody, because you know what? It's the day for birthdays, I guess. But I hope you guys are all doing well. If you enjoyed this video, I'd appreciate a like and subscribe. Any comments, questions, or concerns, go ahead and comment down below. My social medias will be in the description, including my Instagram, Twitter, and Discord page. Come join and post your topsters, and I'll make fun of it for free. But that's about it. Hope you guys are doing well. Have a good day. Bye.